Don't stare. Gerald had been a voyeur all his life. He'd always watch people, and not necessarily in a sexual way, studying them as they went about their business, not knowing they were under observation, fascinated him. There was a thrill in that. It was easier than talking to people, or getting to know them, having to play their games. Those he was watching could never reject him, because they never knew he existed at all. Sometimes that incapability to form normal relationships, social or otherwise, made him very sad. He'd try to break out of the rut, go out and try to meet others, but something would always go wrong. He'd lose interest and break off ties, if they hadn't done the same to him already, and then he'd go back to the old habits, walking, trips alone, sitting in his flat, and watching the normal folk actually living their lives. His crummy admin job and sleeping took up the rest of his time. His unhealthy existence took a worse turn when he dipped into his savings and purchased a high-powered telescope. The man in the gadget shop was smirking at him when he bought it, as if he knew by looking at Gerald what it was for. Gerald said he wanted to do stargazing, and the man nodded sarcastically. Well, that's how it seemed, as he hurried out of the shop with the heavy box. Back at home, Gerald excitedly set it up on its sturdy tripod, pointing out at the street below. He was on the 11th floor, and the city spread out before him as endless fertile ground. At first he contented himself with testing the range and the settings, looking at landmarks and cars on the road. It was a great lens, magnifying practically every detail. Well worth the money. When night fell, he turned off the lights and scanned for illuminated windows and any activity within. Some people put their blinds down, others didn't. The hours flew by as he amused himself, and it was getting pretty late. Most activity was coming to an end, and many more blinds or curtains were pulled shut, lights extinguished. A few tramps and winos were lurking about on the pavement, wet and shiny from the recent rainfall. The odd shift worker scurried around, braving the spray from the road, still busy with traffic even now. Gerald watched a screaming police car rush to some unknown incident, and wondered what the inhabitants would think of him if they could see him. Would they lock him up for being a creep? He thought for a minute how exciting it would be to have their job, having that power, finding mystery and danger every day. No, far too perilous, he decided. He wasn't made that way. Gerald panned back to the buildings above. In the background, Canada Tower's light was winking steadily to stop aircraft ploughing into it. An eerie green haze surrounded the static lights on the Shard, jutting into the murky heavens. He moved down from the skyline and fixed on nearer tower blocks, noting that rain was beginning to dart down once more. One window was still shining brightly, and he twiddled the focus with an eager thumb as the figure of a woman gradually became clear. She was in her late 30s perhaps, with brown hair, which was moving in the wind from the slightly open sash window. A white net curtain billowed into the room behind her. She was looking down at the street, with a rather distracted gaze in her sad, dark eyes. She was not especially pretty, but quite striking and distinctive, wearing a loose turquoise dress with no sleeves. It was too cold and wet for this, but she seemed unfazed. She held onto the windowsill with pale, pensive hands. He wondered what was troubling her and whether he could comfort her, if he was there, if she knew he existed. He continued to gaze from his hidden vantage point, drinking in every detail. She loosened her dress and let it drop to the floor. Gerald's throat felt dry as he studied her lacy black bra and its extensive contents. Again, the cold and the rain didn't register. She watched the street as he watched her. She must be depressed, he thought, or not all there. Or was she an exhibitionist, hoping for someone to be observing her? Gerald had seen such types before. The world was a strange place. An explosion of noise from the street took him away from the tantalizing scene. He disengaged from the telescope and looked down. A moving car had smashed into another parked vehicle, with that sickening crunch of metal on metal, shattering fiberglass. People ran from several directions as the dazed driver clambered from the wreckage, dust from the deployed airbag clouding into the damp air. Probably one of those hooligans who tear around at night high on drugs, Gerald thought. Serves him right. The owner of the other car emerged, a big Asian guy, very irate. There was a torrent of swearing, audible even from here, through the double-glazed glass. It was all very interesting, but a half-dressed woman still held more appeal. Gerald looked back into the eyepiece. The woman was still there, and looking right at him. Instinctively, he peeled away, nearly falling to the ground. His heart missed a beat and the blood drained from his face. Flustered, but assuming he was mistaken, he looked again. There was no question. She was certainly looking in his direction, fixedly, with dark, emotionless eyes. He ducked away, scared, but also ashamed. As the two motorists continued to holler, possibly coming to blows, and some more police sirens rang out towards the confrontation, he fled the room and waited, panting against the wall of the hallway. He thought it over as he calmed down. Maybe she hadn't actually been looking at him. How could she see him in the pitch dark from that distance? Had his lens reflected off something? It didn't seem possible. It couldn't be. But that was certainly enough telescope for tonight. He started to get ready for bed, trying to forget it. When he got under the duvet, though, it replayed in his mind. The woman facing him, his panicked reaction, the feeling of his secret and his safe little bubble broken. Surely it was paranoia. He vacillated between both positions until a day's tiredness caught up on him and he drifted off to sleep. The next day, Gerald kept thinking about the woman. No matter how much work he would do, in the moments he would rest his eyes between entering data or taking phone calls, he would see her as if her image was burned into his retinas. As he'd stand in the office kitchen, making some terrible freeze-dried coffee, he'd consider her strange, withdrawn body language, her half-naked form assailed by the wind and rain. She fascinated him, but still the whole episode was troubling. When he finished work, he went to a competitively priced pub instead, and sat slowly drinking pints, putting off returning home. He didn't want to be tempted, especially if someone was onto him and might make a complaint. That wasn't the only factor, but it was the most logical. Eventually, though, after 4 beers and a disappointing burger that fell apart in his hands, he had to go back. He slowly walked home, his belly full of toxins and his legs sluggish. It was a clear sky tonight, with a bright full moon, bleaching the city in its soft glow. In the lift, his stomach lurched as the elevator rose and he bowed his head, hoping he wouldn't be sick. In his flat, he shut the front door and sank into the sofa, letting his insides settle. He tipped his head into the cushioned back, staring vacantly at the ceiling. After a while, the nausea passed. He looked down and saw the telescope and tripod, decoupled and lying by the windowsill so they wouldn't be visible from the outside. He remembered his fixation of the last 24 hours, and in his lubricated state he couldn't resist. He walked to the doorway and flicked off the light switch. The woman wasn't there, so Gerald had to content himself with the usual surveillance. It was still relatively early and a lot was going on. People worked out on exercise bikes, did yoga, ate late dinners. Actors ran through their lines and armchair pundits slaved over their social media pages on phones and laptops. Some couples kissed and cuddled as they watched the moon and then closed the curtains. The usual reprobates congregated on street corners, with cans of beer, laughing gas, and joints. Food delivery drivers ferried kebabs and burgers to lazy consumers. All very interesting, but not what he wanted. He stifled a yawn as the headache of post-beer dehydration hit. He left his post and went to the kitchen to get some water. Drinking from it, enjoying the cool liquid passing through his throat, he walked back to the living room. That strong moonlight beamed through the window, casting patchy patterns on the sofa and the wall behind it, dark grids from the frame of the window and his dining table. Other objects caused long shadows, stretching out far behind them. It was almost a risk to be using the telescope in these conditions. A discerning eye might see him, picked out by lunar rays. He moved over to the instrument and caressed its metallic, curved surface. A jumbo jet whined overhead, swooping into Heathrow, bright white in the cloudless sky. He wondered where it had flown from and tried to track it in the scope to read its branding, but it was too fast. Then he decided to check again on his favourite flat. Maneuvering the scope back to the window, he could see a figure there, blurred as he twisted the dial. His breath shortened as he anticipated seeing her, and sure enough he was rewarded. This time the woman was looking upwards, perhaps at the plane, perhaps at the moon. She was more serene today, in the same turquoise dress as before. She no longer seemed troubled, with a light smile set on her lips. Maybe she was stoned. Her elegant hand was flat against the window pane, which was again slightly open. The other hand rested on the sill. She breathed slowly, precisely, and her chest heaved in time. Gerald felt his breath mimic hers. It calmed him, made him light-headed. She continued to study the sky, her skin slightly yellow in the lunar glow. She closed her eyes and her smile grew wider. A tear seemed to roll down her cheek, unsettling in the context of a euphoric facial expression. Her hand moved to the left strap of her dress again, and it dropped down her shoulder. Gerald's fingers gripped the focus and were now trembling, in turn shaking the telescope so her image shuddered. It was then that she turned, slowly, to look in his direction once more. This time there was no ambiguity. The striking dark eyes were staring right down the barrel. He gasped and his heart rate soared. Her fixed gaze seemed to pierce his mind, reading everything within. Unlike before, he didn't duck away. He stayed there, glued to the eyepiece and completely exposed. Her demeanor switched to anger and deep hatred. That was too much. He blinked his stinging eyes, hoping it would be proved an illusion. In that split second, when he opened them again, the woman was gone. And in that very same instant, he was aware of a presence behind him. He turned in reaction. He roared in shock at the top of his lungs, recoiling from what greeted him, knocking the telescope sideways on its tripod. She was right there, inches from him, staring from the darkness, spotlit only by the moonbeams which dappled her face and outstretched arms. Her pupils were black as pinheads, predatory and wild. The hands closed the gap and she touched him, as solid as the next person, but glacial cold. She painfully gripped his shoulder with one hand, another clasped around his bare neck. It was then he started screaming uncontrollably, his heart pounding as if it would burst free from his ribcage any moment. Blood surged through his body and he tasted its minerals in his mouth as he shrieked like a battlefield casualty, desperate for morphine. He sank to the floor as she held onto him, and she moved down with him, nose to nose, eyeball to eyeball. The hold around his neck tightened, and he could no longer breathe, let alone scream. Her expression was furious, and instead of words, she just hissed fiercely. He could smell sickly flowers or incense from her breath. He tried to turn away from its pungent strength. Something came into his mind through the terror. Something from school days that his sternly religious headmaster had forced the kids to say every assembly. timeless words said by many in moments of peril, which he did now with his hoarse throat and trembling voice. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. The vice-like grip on his neck gradually loosened, and he sucked in some welcome air. The woman, the ghost, stopped hissing. He continued, scanning his mind uncertainly for the rest of the prayer. Thy kingdom come, thine will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. She straightened and backed away, a reproachful expression taking over from the venom. He gasped to refill his lungs and crawled towards the window, brushing against the legs of the telescope's tripod as he did so. She broke eye contact and began to look from side to side, unsure of herself. Then a sadness returned, the same one from the first night he'd seen her. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we With that, his attacker's image began to fade, other objects in the room visible through what was once solid flesh. The vaporous hands waved haplessly, as if trying to grasp at Gerald's reality and stay there. She dissolved into the moonlight and the shadows. The sad, fearful eyes and mouth were the last to go, holding his gaze until the death. He was left stunned, pained and breathless, his body slick with sweat. He was dimly aware of a neighbour knocking on the door, voicing concern about the alarming cries he'd been making, but he was in no state to respond. He dropped his head to the carpet and let exhaustion and the opiate of relief take its toll. He drifted off to sleep in a fetal position. In the next few days, Gerald was oddly calm. He knew his life had changed, seeing something he could not go back from, something beyond the veil of our world. He hadn't bothered trying to rationalize it. He was certain it had been real, and it was impossible to have imagined such a prolonged episode. The marks on his shoulder and neck testified to that. He didn't really think much about the encounter, in truth. It was as if his mind was suppressing it, like trauma. What he had done is taken the telescope, thankfully unharmed from the drama, back to the store. The sarcastic shop assistant was more neutral this time, as he perceived the seriousness in Gerald's demeanour and just processed the refund. Gerald had avoided the flat as much as possible, but was not really scared of it. He felt he could carry on living there, but would draw the blinds at night. If the ghost came back, if it had somehow attached itself to his home, he would reconsider, but something told him she would not be back. Avoiding the flat meant he'd reply to some messages from those acquaintances he'd lost interest in, seeking company. He'd apologised and made plans, gone out every evening for drinks and food to people's houses. In the office, he had lost himself in his work, having banter with colleagues, which he hadn't done before. Despite the ghostly experience, the violence and the terror, he felt good for the first time in a long while. People were not for watching. They were for getting to know, bonding with, and enriching your life. The world was not for vicarious observation. It was there to be actively participated in. She, whoever she was, had taught him that.